Okay, so there was a new DreamWorks movie quietly dropped onto Netflix the other day, and I've heard no one talking about it. It's called Orion in the Dark, and if that's news to you, that wouldn't surprise me. But then again, it was number 2 in Netflix's most popular movies here in Belgium, so maybe you have heard of it. And all of my friends who talk about animation a bunch are just putting it off. I don't know. There wasn't really that much with this movie that was especially notable to me. I first wanted to check it out because, well, I'm a big fan of DreamWorks. I did a big DreamWorks ranking video a while back, and their most recent hit, Puss in Boots and the Last Wish, is a slam dunk, and got everyone talking about it. I know DreamWorks has made 2 other movies since, but I really can't be bothered to go see Jared Gilman and Trolls 3 Revenge of the Bergens. Puss in Boots The Last Wish was great, but I get why this wouldn't really draw in much of the same crowd as Puss in Boots. That was part of a major series with big-name actors and a theater release. It looked electric and unique, and, well, this is a direct-to-streaming, clearly low-budget movie with little making it stand out. It's based on, apparently, a well-known kids book, but I hadn't heard of it because I'm not in the kids book market, but one element of this surprised me and made me interested to check it out. Charlie Kaufman wrote it. If you know what Orion in the Dark is, you may not know who Charlie Kaufman is. I don't really think there's much crossover between their typical audiences. But Charlie Kaufman has made a name for himself by making intimate, powerful, and mature films touching on various subjects and even multiple mediums. He typically employs high concepts in his films, or, to put it in a less pretentious-sounding way, his movies often dip their toes into more experimental forms of storytelling, be it experimental film techniques themselves, or concepts that push the boundaries of film as a medium by using them to make adaptations like nothing else I've ever seen. But to be frank, there's no other movie he's written that I would show to any child, so it raised this really interesting question for me. What could he do in a kids' movie? And well, I'm sure it's not all his fault, but unfortunately this just isn't very good. Don't get me wrong, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It has its charming elements, and it's doing its best with a director who had only worked on 2 Trolls shorts before this. The studio just didn't give this as much care as other movies it had produced lately. So maybe they were testing the waters. I mean, even in terms of celebrity voice casts, which lower budget movies from big studios like this still try to go in for, this just wasn't given as much love. I mean, Angela Bassett is here, but she really isn't in that much of the film. And does Tom Hanks' son really count as a celebrity? No, not that one. But where this film falls flat, I think, doesn't even have to do with the budget or the voices, which are good, by the way. I wasn't saying that they needed a celebrity voice cast for these roles. I was highlighting how odd it is to not see when that's a prerequisite for so many other low-budget and not very loved movies. I mean, look at like all of early Sony animation. But honestly, it's the writing that isn't very well conceived, to the point that it's almost kind of funny, but in a boring, flat kind of way. And ultimately, this has more writing problems in line with Boss Baby than The Last Wish. But I watched it, so you don't have to. So let's talk about it. Okay, so the plot follows Orion, if you can imagine, an elementary schooler who is scared of everything. He's genuinely just got a lot of anxiety about the world around him, so much so that his parents and counselor at school are trying to find ways to help him process it. One of which is his notebook. His notebook of fears, a la Shark Boy and Lava Girl, but instead of containing the magic to bring OCs to life, it gives us these cute little animated segments for how Orion perceives his world. It's a cute and efficient way to do exposition for a movie like this, and immediately gets us to understand Orion. Anyway, there's a field trip at his school, and he's terrified to go. Especially because he's terrified of messing up in front of his crush, Lisa. He goes to bed that night from school, scared of the future. Scared of the existential problems of life, and, well, scared of the dark. He screams and wants the dark to go away, as he's just sick of everything, and sick of the dark and how oppressive it is to kids. And just as he can't take it anymore, dark appears in his room, like an actual mythic character who represents and controls darkness on all Earth, and he is sick and tired of having such a bad reputation. Darkness makes people scared, lonely, and anxious. He feels like no one likes him, and he wants to prove to someone that he's not so bad. So, to convince Orion he doesn't need to be scared of the dark, and to help with his own self-esteem issues, Dark takes Orion away to see how he does his job. This seems pretty okay so far. Nothing too crazy. But we know how this could go. We've seen our fair share of Pixar movies. He's going to see into this magical new world and learn life lessons, and maybe his notebook will come into play for how he learns to express himself, and it will be nice and, formulaic but cute. But it's right here where the story takes a drastic narrative twist that I wasn't expecting. We switch perspectives to a new character, Hypatia, a young girl being told the story we're hearing. This story is actively being made up by her dad, Orion. We get some exposition that he's making up this story to help her overcome her own fears and anxieties. And maybe you can see how this already starts to get a little muddled. We've had a direct framing device for this story. Orion is writing to us in his notebook as he's trying to navigate his life of fears, and we're even given a challenge that he needs to overcome, this field trip. We then seem to break out of this reality and go into kind of Orion's imagination, and he meets Dark, who has issues of his own to overcome, and a character arc that we will probably also follow. But now we're being told that none of this really matters because it's all made up on the spot, and theoretically we have another character with her character arc. This makes for a very difficult story to pull into a compelling, cohesive narrative. We go back to young Orion and Dark, as Dark tries to show him what nighttime does for people, but it's underwhelming because all he really does is fly around the world, and a metaphor for how the planet rotates around the sun. Speaking of the sun, we're also introduced to Light, who does the opposite of Dark, but seems very positive about his job, and even towards Dark. But right here I like to think the authors noticed how boring everything was so far in the journey, and how little Dark actually does, besides literally just fly in a circle around the planet, so we stop to meet his companions at his job. Sweet dreams, sleep, unexplained noises, insomnia, and quiet. These magical entities are responsible for pretty much exactly what they each sound like. And every night they fly around with Dark. This doesn't really make sense, especially since almost all of them are contradictory to each other, and for some reason weren't flying around with Dark earlier, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is all being made up on the spot by the dad, we can remind ourselves. They're upset with Dark for bringing a child around, but continue their journey as Dark can't go backwards, so there's no way they could take Orion home. Dark shows Orion what each of their jobs does for the next 15 or so minutes of the movie, as Orion stays extremely scared of what they're doing, and calls them out for actively making people's lives worse, which, some of them are. Dark then stops and tells the kid how much he's grown. Again, think about that. He tells him how much he's grown. At this point, all we've really seen is more or less a montage of Orion being scared and questioning all of these things. We're not shown him growing, we're told that he does. Anyway, Orion's like, oh yeah, so true, and his character arc is finished. He's no longer scared. He then breaks the fourth wall to talk about his daughter to Dark. This stops the story, as the daughter is like, that was weird, and adult Orion is like, oh yeah, well, sorry, and the story just picks up again. I guess this was literally just there to remind us that they existed and that this is part of the narrative. We then get a montage of all of them doing their jobs again, but now Orion loves it for some reason and is even helping all of them, even insomnia and unexplained noises, which it doesn't make any sense for why Orion, even no longer scared, would do this. But oh no, some kids are still scared of the dark, and that makes Dark sad again. And hilariously, to try and comfort Dark, Orion says, and I am quoting here, he's thanking Dark in this situation, showing me that there's more to night than just darkness. Why would he say this to darkness? It literally doesn't make any sense. Anyway, there's still so much of this movie's plot left, which is just crazy. We've had Orion's arc already finished, and there isn't anything compelling about these other two narrative threads that we've been weaving. Light then starts to catch up with them. Dark is sad. Orion's like, oh yeah, Light's actually pretty epic. And then we get another interruption because this plot is just so compelling and engaging. Hypatia and adult Orion go for a walk while they continue the story, and we see that adult Orion is still to this day scared of the dark. Hypatia then questions why Story Orion magically lost all of his fears, and adult Orion's like, oh yeah, that's probably not a very smart or accurate narrative choice. So boom, back to the story, and Orion is just scared again. Isn't it so cool to write a story like this? Isn't this compelling to watch our characters be magically changed and then rechanged out of any of their character flaws? Isn't this so cool? So yeah, he's scared of the dark again, and this makes Dark feel even worse. And then Orion goes off for some reason about how light is the coolest thing in the world, and that any creature who only has dark is deprived and not living a full life. Again, why would he do this? His big speech about light actually convinces all of the weird side companions to ditch dark and see how the light of day looks. And this literally convinces Dark to give up on life and kill himself. I don't even know if I can say that on YouTube. He literally sits and he waits for light to catch up, which literally erases him from existence. He just sits down and decides to die in this kids movie for like no reason. Like, I understand the technical reason, but it just doesn't make any narrative sense, and I was baffled. And then, again, the story hilariously gets interrupted by adult Orion as he realizes he wrote himself into a corner and doesn't know what to do to end the story. Hypatia is then like, what if I just popped into the story and read Orion an encouraging poem? And then she just does. She comes into this narrative world as it starts to burn up around them, because without darkness, it's light all the time, and this starts to heat things up, and the world literally starts to end. He and the other night entities realize they were wrong about Dark, not because they now like him, which is what darkness wanted all along, but because everyone will burn up and die without him. So they use Sweet Dream's dream powers to go inside Orion's mind and resurrect Dark from his memories somehow. But inside the dream, all of Orion's anxieties and fears come back as he's faced with the prospect of dying inside the dream, which would make him die in real life. This manifests all of the old drawings to life that he did in the notebook. Hey, they did come back up. Kind of. His existential dread turns into a black hole eating everything up in his dream world for some reason. Dark is about to die again, presumably for good, and Orion along with him, as the others struggle to make real, fake Orion wake up from his dream. That's a fun sentence. Until Quiet reminds him that he has a field trip that he'll miss if he doesn't wake up. This revives him, bringing Dark with him. And so, all the problems are resolved. Somehow, for no reason, Dark is now happy that everyone is obligated to want him around, but hey, Orion learned... well, he didn't learn much, but at least Hypatia learned... But oh yeah, Hypatia. For some reason the plot isn't over yet, and now she's stuck in the past. But then a time traveler named Tico comes in and brings her back to her own time while fighting monsters created by their breaking of the space-time continuum, and when they get back to her time, they all lived happily ever after. No, wait, there's more. We then shift perspectives again to see that this was adult Hypatia telling her kid Tico the story of her dad telling her a story when she was a child, where child Hypatia hijacked the story, and now Tico is hijacking this story. And we see Grandpa Orion and Grandpa Lisa, because remember when Lisa was supposed to be a character of this story. We then see that apparently Child Orion did overcome his fears, go on the field trip, hold hands with Lisa, and that 5th grade crush somehow turned into a relationship, and then marriage, and then kids, and then grandkids, and now, after this revelation, this futile exercise in framing devices called a story is over. Not to get too heated about any of this, I still think on the whole it's a cute and fun time, but especially in retrospect, and as the movie was unfolding, my girlfriend and I couldn't help but just laugh, as the story seemed to have no understanding for making any cohesive or engaging narrative. There's no single character here that you can follow and be invested in, because they're all being controlled and changed on a dime when the author needs them to. And this just shocked me, coming from a writer like Charlie Kaufman, who I've praised in the past for doing such a good job at balancing good characters through sometimes purposefully confusing narratives. But these layers don't come off as intentional narrative choices to help convey any more profound message about these characters or the world, or even the fact that kids as young as Orion are now having to deal with these concepts of existential dread far earlier than ever before, which could and should be an exciting and important subject to tackle in a kids' movie. Instead, they just feel like they were added out of confusion. But if you would have asked me, I would have told you that if anybody could pull off this kind of movie, it was Kaufman. But unfortunately, as I alluded to in the opening, this ends up feeling more like Boss Baby, a movie that rides the lines of being incoherent, but gets away with it by saying, oh, it's all made up and framed through someone telling a story. It's not good. This framing device doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can add an extra layer to a film that would be too self-serious without it, like the framing device in The Princess Bride. It never muddles the story, it's funny, and it gives some brevity from a very dense, goofy story. But this doesn't pull anything off in a way that would leave any kind of impact. Maybe some kids will watch this and it will comfort them, and that's great. But I don't see how it can when its message is barely comprehensible to me. I ended up giving this film a 3 out of 5. It's a perfectly passable film that gets immensely muddled and seems to lose sight of what it wants to do, but it still makes for an interesting enough ride with its decent world, a fun cast of characters, and mostly fine animation and art design. I say mostly fine because Orion's dad's design is awful. Why does he look like that? He looks like if you tried to take a character design from VeggieTales and make it like a human animated character. It's horrifying. Unfortunately, I wouldn't suggest this if you aren't a DreamWorks completionist, but I've already spent much longer talking about this than I intended, but I hope you guys enjoyed. As per my little announcement short, my next real video essay will take much longer than my normal monthly video release schedule, and I won't finish it until sometime after March at the very least. I'll continue to make other videos like this in the meantime, but all of my free time for research is going either into that video or into my rather large workload here at school. So bear with me. I love you all, and goodbye.